Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, back in 2005, Barack Obama took this picture with Minister Louis Farrakhan. And as most people know, Minister Louis Farrakhan is the leader of the Nation of Islam. He's made some controversial statements in the past. And for that reason, people have accused Minister Louis Farrakhan of being a racist, of being a bigot, of being an anti Semite. And because of Minister Louis Farrakhan's reputation, this photograph has caused controversy. And that controversy is primarily in conservative media, on these conservative channels and websites and stuff like that. They have made a big deal out of this. For most people, this photograph is not a big deal. It's some old news because Barack Obama served his time in the White House. He's long gone from the White House. And this is an old photograph taken in 2005. So for most people, this is not a big deal. But for certain segments of the Jewish community and certain segments of the far right community, this photograph has become a big deal. And I want to just take some time to read some excerpts from this article and a couple of other articles, and then I'm going to share my opinion about this situation. So this photograph was taken by Askia Muhammad, and according to the reports, he basically swore to keep this photograph a secret. This photograph wasn't released during the time when Barack Obama was running for U.S. Senate. It wasn't released when he was running for president. And the thing that's important to point out is that Barack Obama at the time was a state senator. Now, people have asked Barack Obama about this controversial photograph, and through a spokesman, he referred people to an interview that he did back in 1995 after the Million Man March. And as you all know, the Million Man March was organized by Minister Louis Farrakhan. So this is what Barack Obama said during that 1995 interview about the Million Man March. He said, "What I saw was a powerful demonstration of an impulse and a need for African American men to come together to recognize each other and affirm our rightful place in the society. There was a profound sense that African American men were ready to make a commitment to bring about change in our communities and lives." This article went on to say, "But cursing out white folks is not going to get the job done. Anti-Semitic and anti-Asian statements are not going to lift us up. We've got some hard nuts and bolts organizing and planning to do. We've got communities to build." So that's what Obama said back in 1995. And from that statement, it's clear that obviously he doesn't agree with things that Farrakhan has said. However, he recognizes the greatness and the importance and the symbolism of the Million Man March and of the Nation of Islam, frankly. So I'm going to go on to read some excerpts from a couple of other articles. First, I'm going to start with this Breitbart article. And this Breitbart article starts off by just attacking Minister Louis Farrakhan, calling him a black supremacist, calling him anti-Semite and anti-gay and all this and that. And this article points out some of the beliefs of the Nation of Islam, like that the nation believes that the white man is the devil, and that the white man was grafted by a black scientist named Yaqub. And this article goes on to talk about how Farrakhan and Nation of Islam have a history of anti-Semitism. It talks about how Farrakhan spoke highly of Hitler's abilities as a leader. It also talks about how Farrakhan discusses how Jews control various industries. And then he also, they also mentioned the fact that Farrakhan referred to Judaism as a gutter religion. And for that reason, they're saying that he's an anti-Semite, and they're trying to associate Farrakhan with Barack Obama because of this simple photograph. And this article also talks about how during the 2008 debate between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, Tim Russert grilled Obama about whether or not he renounces Farrakhan. And this is what Obama said during that debate. And I remember that debate like it was yesterday. Yeah, I'm a big political person. I watch these political debates. And this is what Obama said. He said, I've been very clear in my denunciation of Minister Louis Farrakhan's anti-Semitic comments. I think that they are unacceptable and reprehensible. I did not solicit this support. He expressed pride in an African American who seems to be bringing the country together. I obviously cannot censor him, but it is not support that I sought. And we're not doing anything, I assure you, formally or informally with Minister Louis Farrakhan. He also went on to say this. He said, I live in Chicago. He lives in Chicago. I've been very clear in terms of me believing that what he has said is reprehensible and inappropriate, and I have consistently distanced myself from him. So despite all this condemnation of Farrakhan, despite him saying that he thinks what Farrakhan has said is unacceptable, reprehensible, and he's referred to his comments as anti-Semitic, and he's talked about how those comments are inappropriate. Breitbart News goes on to say he did not explicitly reject Farrakhan's support. So despite all that renunciation, I mean, if that's not a rejection of Farrakhan's support, I don't know what is. But these people are simply trying to tarnish and bash Barack Obama, even though he's not even in the White House anymore. That just shows you how much hatred and contempt they have for Barack Obama. They also cite the fact that that he had some ties to Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers was a member of the Weather Underground, and you all are familiar with this. Anyone that followed the elections back in 2008 and 2012, they're very familiar with this. So these people are basically trying to use this photograph, even though Obama is out of the White House, they're trying to use it to tarnish and defame Barack Obama. So I'm going to go on to read this, excerpts from this last article right here, and then I'm going to provide my commentary. So in this article, it points out how law professor Alan Dershowitz went on to say that if he had known that the president had posed with Farrakhan when he was a senator, he said that he would not have campaigned for Barack Obama if he knew that. He talks about how they were smiling in the photograph. He also describes Farrakhan as anti-Semitic and anti-American. And he went on to say this. This is what Dershowitz said. Well, before I go into what he said, he also threatened to leave the Democratic Party if Representative Keith Ellison was elected to be the chair of the Democratic Party because of Keith Ellison's past ties to the Nation of Islam. So Dershowitz said this. He said, we should have no one in public office associating with a bigot like Farrakhan. All right, so those are the stories, and I want to just take some time to share my thoughts about this whole situation. The first thing I want to talk about is how this photograph would have affected the election. I think that this photograph probably would have been the straw that broke the camel's back. You already had the controversy involving Reverend Jeremiah Wright. You also had the controversy involving Bill Ayers, people trying to tie Obama to Bill Ayers. And we all remember Jeremiah Wright. He made controversial statements about America, about American racism, slavery, and imperialism. And he actually said, God damn America. And because of that, people tried to associate that with Barack Obama because Barack Obama, after all, had been a member of that church for like 20 years. So I think that this photograph of him smiling with Minister Louis Farrakhan probably would have destroyed his campaign. This probably would have been it. They probably would have played all kinds of controversial statements that Farrakhan has made, and they probably would have kept this photograph up in political ads, and that would have destroyed Obama, particularly during the primaries. It probably would have been used fiercely during the primaries, and he probably wouldn't have even got the nomination because of this photograph. So, that's the first point that I want to make. The second thing that I have to do is I have to commend the brother who kept this photograph from being exposed. I have to commend the Nation of Islam for not exposing this photograph, because you heard me read the statements that Barack Obama made about the Nation of Islam, renouncing Farrakhan and stuff like that, uh, calling him anti-Semitic and stuff like that. He literally threw Farrakhan under the bus in order to get the presidency. So despite that, the Nation of Islam realized what was important. They realized that despite their personal feelings about how Obama dealt with the minister and how he dealt with the Nation of Islam, they knew that something was more important. They knew that the election of Barack Obama was more important than how they felt about the way Obama dealt with the Nation of Islam in particular. And for that, I have to commend the Nation of Islam. That gives me a sense of greater respect for the Nation of Islam. I've already had, a high degree of respect for the nation, even though I disagree with some of their opinions and theology. I still have great respect for them. And this is just another example why, people should respect them. So that's one thing that I have to point out. And the other thing that I want to talk about is how this affects my view of Barack Obama. You know, Without even going into the details about how he threw Farrakhan under the bus or Jeremiah Wright, this photograph right here says a lot to me. Um, it speaks to me. And the fact that Barack Obama actually attended the Million Man March and actually recognized the greatness within that march, the positive aspects of that march, it speaks to the fact that this man does have love for his people, does have respect for his people, does realize just how important the plight of black people is. That's what this photograph says to me. That's what the fact that the brother, the mere fact that that brother attended that march says that that brother, Barack Obama, is concerned about black people. That's what it says to me. No one would sit in a church for 20 years with a pastor that speaks on black issues if they didn't have concern for black people. This brother wouldn't have gone to the Million Man March if he didn't have concern for black people. This brother would not have posed in this photograph if he did not have concern for black people and if he did not have some level of respect for the Nation of Islam and for Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, it gives me more respect for President Obama in that sense, even though I don't respect the way he eventually dealt with Farrakhan and with Jeremiah Wright. And I'm going to get into that now. Often when black people are in positions of power and influence, or, whether they're politicians or whether they are entertainers, they're often asked about their opinions dealing with Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. We saw that recently Erykah Badu was asked about her opinions about Farrakhan, and that led into a discussion about Hitler that became controversial. But it's like they don't do this with most people. Like other groups of people, for the most part, they don't pressure them to condemn somebody. Only recently with Donald Trump, and I'm going to get into that in a second. But here you have all these black politicians and black political figures or black public figures. They're always asked, what is their opinion about the Nation of Islam? They're forced to bow down and kowtow to these Zionist interests. They're forced to pledge allegiance to the Zionist And they're forced to condemn and demonize this brother, Minister Louis Farrakhan. And I just think that the fact that they do that, that people actually cave to these interests, that just speaks to how weak they are. I mean, and despite the statements that I made that were positive about Barack Obama, in that sense, he was weak. In that sense, many of our prominent elected officials, even leaders of so-called civil rights organizations, they are weak when they're forced to condemn this man, Minister Louis Farrakhan, who, despite the fact that I disagree with some things that he says, he's done great good in the community. But these people are forced to condemn this brother, and that just speaks to how subjugated they are, how much they are dominated by this interest group that is hell bent on destroying Minister Louis Farrakhan. So, that's one thing that I have to say. And the fact that you have Alan Dershowitz saying that he would not have campaigned for him, that just goes back to my point about how this photograph would have probably destroyed Obama's election, his chance for being president. Because you would have many of those many Jews who supported Obama, many of them would have backed out if they saw this photograph. And we know that a lot of them probably raised money for him. They participate in the campaigning for him and all that kind of stuff. So if they pulled out their support, it would be difficult for him to be elected. And if they put all their money and their support behind another candidate, he probably wouldn't have been president. And I think that this speaks to the nature of these people. I mean, first of all, if you see that this brother, Barack Obama, has already renounced, statements that Farrakhan made, despite that, these people are still making a big deal about this photograph. Despite the fact that Barack Obama is his own man, with his own viewpoints, and he's expressed those viewpoints where he's trying to bring people together of different ethnicities and different religions and all that kind of stuff. Despite that, you had these people saying they would have withdrew support for this man just based on this one photograph, and that just says a lot about these people. It says a lot about people like Alan Dershowitz. It tells you who they are and what they're about. Here you have Keith Ellison, one of the most progressive members of Congress, and this guy is talking about he would no longer be a Democrat if Keith Ellison was to be elected chair of the Democratic Party. These people want to condemn Barack Obama for taking a photograph. They want to condemn him for his ties to Jeremiah Wright and this and that. But these same people are nothing but hypocrites. They're not condemning Donald Trump for his ties to the alt-right. They're not condemning Donald Trump for, these people that support him. Like they were actually making a big deal out of the fact that Farrakhan openly supported Barack Obama. But these same people did not make that same big deal about David Duke openly supporting Donald Trump. They did not make that same big deal about the KKK openly supporting Donald Trump. They did not make that same big deal about the alt-right, people like Richard Spencer supporting Donald Trump. They didn't make that same big deal. They didn't make a big deal about the fact that you had a white supremacist actually appointed to be chief political strategist in the White House. But yet and still, they want to make a big deal about a photograph that's over 12 years old. And they want to try to draw some ties between Barack Obama and Minister Louis Farrakhan just because, he attended this march or because he took this photograph. And I think that that's absurd, and it speaks to the hypocrisy of these people. It speaks to just how crazy they are, frankly. And you have, these people referring to Minister Louis Farrakhan as a black supremacist. Now, I understand why somebody may try to say something like that. But if you compare so-called black supremacy to white supremacy, there is no comparison. The last time I checked, the Nation of Islam did not lynch anybody. The last time I checked, the Nation of Islam didn't bomb any churches. The last time I checked, the Nation of Islam didn't burn people in fires and stuff and shoot innocent white people and all that kind of stuff. That's what the KKK did to black people. They did all those things to black people. So to call the Nation of Islam a black supremacist organization is absurd in my mind. Black people don't even have the power to be racist. But yet they want to call this brother a racist. They want to call him this. They want to call him that. And that brings me to this point about anti-Semitism. First of all, I don't have anything against people for practicing any kind of religion. I don't have any problem with somebody being Jewish or being, of the Jewish faith or anything like that. I have no problem with that. What I have a problem with is people exploiting religion to justify the oppression of people. For instance, using religion to justify the occupation of Palestine, using religion to justify the killing of Palestinian people and the oppression of Palestinian people. That's what I have a problem with.